Education is about a child and their future, and we as adults have got to do the things necessary to step in and be that support to the children that we're charged with. And we know that it can be done safely. And for those teachers who may have vulnerabilities themselves, there are other things that can be done so that they can continue to contribute in a major way. Perhaps they teach virtually students that are vulnerable health-wise and have to learn virtually. But the point here is that families have to have options for their students, and we know that it can be done, and it can be done well and safely for all involved.
You wonder what the risk is not to go back to class. I was looking at Dr. Redfield's comments from the CDC yesterday, and just to paraphrase his words, he said, we're seeing more suicides and overdoses among high school students than COVID cases, which leads to the question, what is the risk of not being in the classroom?
That is absolutely the question. And there was one mom in the roundtable yesterday who talked about her teenage daughter who was very depressed, and she said she was a shadow of her former self the last several months. All it took was one day back in school. She said it was like a 180-degree turnaround, and those stories are true across the country. Kids have got to get back to school. We can do this, and we know that teachers and education leaders across the country can come together and can solve the most local issues and questions if they just resolve to do so.
Well, Dr. Fauci is talking right now, so we may dip in a moment, but billions of dollars, I see the camera moving off of him, billions of dollars has been passed through Congress to try and get schools.
President Trump continuing to struggle in the polls against his Democratic challenger, Joe Biden. And today, the President of the United States floated the idea of delaying November's election, something that he legally cannot do. He did so in a tweet. The President, yet again without evidence, attacked the integrity of mail-in voting, which is how he voted in the last election. He wrote in part, quote, delay the election until people can properly, securely, and safely vote. But as the Constitution tells us, only Congress has the authority to postpone a presidential election. And even despite similar crises like wars and economic turmoil, never in our history has our nation delayed an election. We should also know
dying from coronavirus a month after attending the president's rally in Tulsa.
Find things you need.
Could be done, but all of these decisions and plans are best accomplished at the most local level and in concert with students who really are the ones that we're there to serve.
I'm out of time, but I really appreciate yours. I hope you will come back and we can continue this discussion because
Thanks,
a
Bill.
lot's hanging in the balance. Thank you for your time. Betsy DeVos with us in Washington. Task Force continues. Take you back there in a moment. Also on the Hill, Mitch McConnell moments ago unveiling a plan to boost unemployment benefits for another 3 months. He says he is
more than 100 days ago, and I actually wrote a plan in the minority on how to safely and clearly open up Congress. Not bringing everybody back at once, but actually bringing the committees back that you have to do the work. Putting it in a bigger size room so you had the distant capability of doing it. So I don't know if you want to go place by place, but I watched a Democrat many times without masks. I watch Democrats now who don't have to show up to work and still get paid. I watched a Democrat from Arizona sit on a boat with no mask voting and getting paid. So everyone gets here and runs on their own merit. But if you're asking what responsibility I have, yes. I've laid out a plan that's very clear that the Speaker has never done anything on, nor has she allowed testing in this building. So if you're concerned about that, there are people that can wear a mask, there are people who wash their hands, they could have no symptoms and still have COVID, because we go back and forth. And that person could be walking around the floor, putting their card in a box to vote, where every other member goes up and puts their card in a box and vote. But there is no testing here. That is a greater risk than we have before. And I've watched the Speaker do nothing about it. Even though for more than 100 days,
my numbers every 5 minutes, and it also tells me which way.
Through the blood and sacrifice of American martyrs and heroes, including the blood of the American hero that was buried today with the tributes of 3 American presidents. In this country, we tell the government what to do, not the other way around. The point is, though, if Donald Trump could end the election, stop the election, if Donald Trump had the power to remain in office, we know for sure that he would exercise it. The reality is that he is being crushed politically. We received the worst economic news in the history of the country today. We are in a pandemic that will kill more Americans than the Japanese, Germans, and Italians during the Second World War were able to do before it's over. We all know that the school openings are going to be a disaster. And as we move into September, we're going to see a mortgage and eviction crisis begin in this country that will be 3 times what it was at the height of the Great Recession. We have dark and troubled days ahead, and we see an illiberal president testing the boundaries of American democracy, which he's done for 3.5 years. And what I'll say today, Brian, lastly, is what I said 4 years ago, is fascism didn't grow and thrive in the 1930s because it was strong. It grew and thrived because democracy was weak. And we have a sick and ailing democracy in this country where there is too many of our leaders have infidelity towards small L liberal democracy and small R Republican form of government. And it's a real problem and a real crisis.
Steve, I mean, on that problem and on that crisis specifically, every Democratic guardrail has been steamrolled by Donald Trump. So why do you think an election and a transfer of power will be different?
Well, I think that it will be different in the sense that when Donald Trump loses the election, I doubt very much we'll see the symbolism of the peaceful transition of power. There won't be coffee at the White House. We won't see Donald Trump on the dais. In the end, as someone pointed out last week, that in a democracy, it requires one side being willing to lose. It's the loser that cedes legitimacy to the winner through the electoral process that says, hey, we'll get you next time. We tried, we gave a message to the American people went with the other person. Trump is ceding the ground that this election, no matter the outcome, will be illegitimate. He'll never recognize the legitimacy of it should he lose the election. And 35% of the country or so won't recognize the legitimacy of the election, which means we're in very dangerous territory. But still at the end, Donald Trump can't stop anybody from voting. Only the American people can stop themselves from voting. He can do a lot of things, and they're going to do it to make it more difficult. But when you look at the strategy, and the academic Sarah Kendzior has made this point over and over again, and it's spot on. Trump doesn't have a strategy to win the election. He increasingly simply has a strategy to try to get it closed through the introduction of enough chaos that he's able to steal it in the end. Then we should all be vigilant about that, because if he can steal it, he will steal it. He has no fidelity to the American idea or ideals. It is a strange and foreign thought for him, the idea that the country was founded by leaders like George Washington, who voluntarily walked away from power when they otherwise could have been a king or an emperor.
There's a spectrum that we have here of treatments that are way downstream, treatments that are midstream, and then preventative measures that we can all take because we're all in this together. And Mr. President, I want to thank you for emphasizing the 3 W's. Number 1, wash your hands. Number 2, watch your distance. Number 3, wear a mask. I was in Miami just a few weeks ago, and I promised them I would tell you this. I was in Trump country, and they told me to deliver you a message, Mr. President. They told me to tell you you look badass in a face mask. I promised them I would tell you that in Miami. I told the president he looks badass in a face mask. We are all in this together. Give blood, give plasma, save a life. We'll get through this, America.
Thank you, John.
Thank you.
Please.
Thank you, Mr. President, for having me here today, and really to join the partners that are here together to join our mission of combating this disease with our particular expertise and technologies. I also want to thank you for your leadership. I think that no one has seen this in the world. It takes resolve and it takes effort, and you've shown that both with your leadership but also with the founding of Operation Warp Speed. So thank you for that. I also want to thank you for your outstanding team that we're working with. Great people, really have done a fantastic job, and for proactively engaging the private sector to combat COVID-19. I am Paul Perot. I'm the CEO of CSL Limited.
Said that seemed like a minor backtrack. I think she was very clear up to that point. There's always somebody with a story, no matter what, and they're real stories. We can't explain them. There's always someone who was the 1 in 1,000, who took a therapy that didn't work for anyone except that one person, maybe, or maybe there was another factor that we didn't know. So I think she just got a little nervous because she went out on a very firm limb from a medical perspective, but she's in a hot seat herself. And you know, I wish she hadn't backed her. I don't think she meant it to be, therefore we can ignore the science.
All right, Dr. Sepkowitz, thank you so much for breaking that down for us. As we mentioned, the death toll from the pandemic is now well beyond 150,000, an average of more than 850 people a day since the first death in February, and the equivalent of 3 airliners crashing every 24 hours for weeks and weeks. A 9/11 kind of national tragedy 50 times over, with few signs right now that the loss of life will slow down. The hotspot state of Florida just broke its daily death record for the 3rd consecutive time. Plus, the number keeps going up for the Miami Marlins. Now, 17 baseball players and 2 coaches have tested positive. Let's go now to Randy Kay in Palm Beach. Tell us what officials there are saying, Randy.
Brianna, it's certainly not good news here. As you mentioned, that death record, another 253 deaths to report. This is the 3rd day in a row. As you said, yesterday we saw 216 deaths. More than 6,500 Floridians have died so far, and we are quickly approaching just about 10,000 cases here in the state of Florida. Our statewide positivity rate is 19.3% today. That's actually up from 19% yesterday, so going in the wrong direction. And about 8,400 in the state, we're down to about 17% of all.
That we choose the right.
That event today, as the president said, if you tested positive, donate plasma, you have something special. That's the message from the Red Cross. Meanwhile, Fox News alert, 3 Chicago police officers shot during an arrest this morning. We are live on the ground with what happened there today. Coming up.
Hey, can I...
Safe drive, safe.
Fine.
Who knows what on the top of their consulate and not allowing a fire department in? Why does the rest of the world know so much about intel than Adam Schiff? Not only should the speaker put a plan together, she ought to change the chair, because while he sits and worries about Russia, we wonder how much further and how much more damage China is doing to this country.
Join Anderson Cooper and Dr. Sanjay Gupta live for a new CNN Global Town Hall on the coronavirus pandemic.
We're determined to keep bringing you as much knowledge as we can.
Coronavirus, Facts and Fears, live tonight at 8 Eastern.
It's anniversary time here at Carl's.
And in celebration of 64 years, dinner's on us.
Save up to 40% on appliances.
And get a steak dinner for 2.
This LG French door refrigerator is just $9.99.
Plus get a steak dinner for 2.
70-inch and larger TVs are on sale.
Get a steak dinner for 2.
Save on grills, mattresses, and furniture too during Carl's 64th anniversary sale.
Carl's, your servicing dealer since 1956.
Beyond basic brushing and flossing,
to Dentex.
Joining our conversation is Dr. Peter Hotez, an expert in infectious diseases. He is the director of the Texas Children's Hospital Center for Vaccine Development. He also serves as the founding dean of the National School of Tropical Medicine at Baylor College. Also joining us, senior writer for Politico, Jake Sherman, also an MSNBC political contributor, and also on the beat of just how many staffers, Jake Sherman, I've been following you on Twitter and everything you've reported about how endangered so many Republican staffers feel by their bosses' policies and procedures about bringing everyone, including interns, into the offices and not just refusing to mandate mask wearing, but shaming people who wear them. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, there's been a stigma, Nicole, against masks in the Republican Party. We've seen it on the House floor, most notably, and this is not picking on Republicans. I mean, we watch the floor carefully. Everybody in the Senate wears a mask, almost to a person, besides Rand Paul, who says he's immune to the virus because he's had it. But in the House, there are just people who don't wear masks. Louis Gohmert, who was diagnosed yesterday, at least found out that he had the virus yesterday, walked around without a mask for weeks at a time. We're not relying on sources for this. We saw this with our own eyes. He went back to his office and announced that he had the virus to his staff, and we got emails from people on his staff saying they were afraid about with the policies that Gohmert had in place. I mean, this is unlike, I've been covering Congress, Nicole, I've been on with you for a long time on TV, been covering this building for more than a decade. I've never seen the just discomfort with the protocols in place on Capitol Hill. It's absolutely astounding the volume of incoming I'm getting that I'm sharing with our readers in Playbook and on Twitter about how people feel the building is broken. And remember, this entire complex is under the control, at least on the House side, of Nancy Pelosi, who sets the rules. She and Mitch McConnell decided not to test members of Congress when they come off of airplanes into this building. They're coming in here from around the country. Masks were mandated yesterday for the House of Representatives. No testing. People are coming in from airplanes, from traveling. It's just, it's a dangerous scene. I mean, we're wearing these N95 masks at Politico, and reporters, and Garrett Hake and all of our reporters up here are doing it. But members of Congress kind of set their own rules all the time.
Dr. Hotez, you talked eloquently about the disinformation that's been put out there. This is almost next level disinformation. This is defiance. This is denial. This is trutherism about really non-invasive public health practices like mask wearing, social distancing, contact tracing. I cannot imagine if anything else were killing 1,000 Americans a day, terrorism, heart disease, violent criminal gangs, that we wouldn't have stopped in our tracks and demanded a bipartisan effort to stop it. What is our certain fate if we continue down this path that Jake just described, where Republican elected officials are not following non-invasive public health measures and are shaming any staff members who want to protect themselves with something like a mask?
Well, thanks, Nicole. I wish it were 1,000 Americans a day dying, but it's higher than that now. It's getting up to 1,500, and we're headed back up to 2,000 Americans a day dying. We've had the whole southern United States on fire, and now it's moving up. It's going into the Ohio River Valley, so it's going to start moving into Ohio, Indiana, Illinois. This is terrible. So we're increasing the number of deaths every day. It's looking more and more like May, and pretty soon it's going to look like April. And yet we're still bickering about whether we should be wearing masks. We should be so far beyond this at this point, having a national plan for control to bring our country back down to containment. At this point, the nation's paralyzed. We cannot open schools. We can't have anything close to a normal level of life, and yet we have a totally disengaged White House right now that will not take ownership and will not even admit that there is a problem. Last week I was on with you, and maybe things were getting a little better. The president seemed to be conceding a couple of things, that things will get worse before they'll get better. But then earlier this week, he just reverted to the old playbook, talking about hydroxychloroquine and saying it's a harmless virus. You know, all of the country's frustrated. I'm particularly frustrated because we know it needs to be done. We need to bring it back down to containment. I put out a plan last week saying we can get there by October 1. It's not that hard. We can rescue the country still if we put our minds to it, but we have to do it with federal leadership.
In getting the vaccine distributed properly.
And I think I could have Francis say that tremendous progress has been made on the vaccine beyond anything that we would have thought if you go back 6 months. What do you think?
It is just frankly quite astounding, Mr. President. I've been at NIH for 27 years and director for 11, and I've seen some amazing things happen, but the way in which the whole research community, public and private, philanthropies, everybody has come together to work on this, not worrying about who gets the credit, trying to figure out how to strip away anything that's going to slow things down. And I think all of us, motivated by the fact that this is the most serious problem we've encountered in our professional lifetimes, even a day matters. And so that's why a lot of people look kind of sleepy, because we're all working 24/7, trying to make sure that nothing possibly slows this process down. Yeah, the vaccines, this week is a big week, as you just heard, having 2 phase 3 trials started in the very same day, this past Monday. And based upon very impressive phase 1 data showing that people who got that in the phase 1 trials developed these high levels of neutralizing antibodies that should be very predictive of protection, but you don't know until you actually run the trial in those 30,000 people. By the way, you heard earlier about coronavirus.gov, which is the place you can go to find out how you can donate plasma. There's another thing you can do if you go to that website, which is to sign up to say you're interested in a vaccine trial. And we need people to volunteer for that as well, because we're going to, with these 4 or 5 trials coming along very quickly, each of which needs 30,000 volunteers, that's a lot of people, and we need them.
And Francis, we're working very well with other countries.
We are indeed. And science has always been international, and it certainly is right now. And we work with our colleagues in Europe and the UK and Asia in a way that I think represents the best of the best. And again, everybody recognizes we're all in this together across the whole planet.
Okay, thank you very much, everybody. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
So some interesting moments here with Dr. Birx and Dr. Fauci, with the president of the American Red Cross there. The push there is to get those who have tested positive for COVID-19 or have recovered to donate plasma. That's what the event's all about. Heard a comment there about goggles. Yesterday, Dr. Fauci recommended have goggles or a face shield, that perhaps that would be something that should be considered to fend off the possibility of infecting others or infecting yourself. The president said he first heard about it an hour ago, deferred to Dr. Birx, and then she said this was something Dr. Fauci had mentioned yesterday. With regard to testing, the question about testing lags, the doctor there from the NIH saying the hospitals and nursing homes can turn around a test in a day's time, which appears to be the case in most parts of the country. With regard to the rest of the population, for everyone else, they said it's about 2 or 3 days. That point can be contested. There are various parts of the country where a test does not come back in 2 or 3 days. Oftentimes it takes a week before you get an answer on a positive or negative test, something certainly the government like
today is it can streamline our language. There should be in our business no more talk of the president speaking in code or dog whistle. As I said last night, it's only dog whistle if your dog has gone deaf. Yesterday, he came out against low-income housing. Today, he said out loud on social media, we should perhaps delay our election. This is the world I leave to you. I'll be watching. Thank you for having me.
We'll be watching you at 11. Thank you, Brian. When we come back, with cases of coronavirus on the rise across this country, will it take a second lock?
The best local pro for any home project, online or with the app.
This is Karen.
Looking to refinance your mortgage? The first thing you want to do.
I was proud that John Lewis was a friend of mine. I met him when I was in law school. He came to speak. And I went up and I said, Mr. Lewis, you are one of my heroes. What inspired me more than anything as a young man was to see what you and Ern Lawson, Bob Moses, and Diane Nash, and others did. And he got that kind of, "Aw shucks, thank you very much." Next time I saw him, I'd been elected to the United States Senate. And I told him, "John, I'm here because of you." And on Inauguration Day in 2009, he was one of the first people I greeted and hugged on that stand. And I told him, "This is your day too." He was a good and kind and gentle man. And he believed in us, even when we don't believe in ourselves. And it's fitting that the last time John and I shared a public forum was on Zoom. And I'm pretty sure neither he nor I set up the Zoom call because we didn't know how to work it. There's a virtual town hall with a gathering of young activists who had been helping to lead this summer's demonstrations in the wake of George Floyd's death. And afterwards I spoke to John privately, and he could not have been prouder to see this new generation of activists standing up for freedom and equality. A new generation that was intent on voting and protecting the right to vote. In some cases, a new generation running for political office. And I told him, all those young people, John, of every race and every religion, from every background and gender and sexual orientation, John, those are your children. They learned from your example, even if they didn't always know it. They had understood through him what American citizenship requires, even if they'd only heard about his courage through the history books. By the thousands, faceless, anonymous, relentless young people, black and white, have taken our whole nation back to those great wells of democracy which were dug deep by the founding fathers in the formulation of the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence. Dr. King said that in the 1960s, and it came true again this summer. We see it outside our windows in big cities and rural towns, in men and women, young and old, straight Americans and LGBTQ Americans, blacks who long for equal treatment, and whites who can no longer accept freedom for themselves while witnessing the subjugation of their fellow Americans. We see it in everybody doing the hard work of overcoming complacency, of overcoming our own fears and our own prejudices, our own hatreds. You see it in people trying to be better, truer versions of ourselves. And that's what John Lewis teaches us. That's where real courage comes from. Not from turning on each other, but by turning towards one another. Not by sowing hatred and division, but by spreading love and truth. Not by avoiding our responsibilities, to create a better America and a better world, but by embracing those responsibilities with joy and perseverance, and discovering that in our beloved community, we do not walk alone. What a gift John Lewis was. We are all so lucky to have had him walk with us for a while and show us the way. God bless you all. God bless America. God bless this gentle soul who pulled it closer to its promise. Thank you very much.
Is currently in recess until 6:30 Eastern today, but when members return, we're expecting votes on 3 amendments to a 2021 federal
spread the message on how to keep safe during this virus.
Yeah, and as I often say, these are not just numbers. These are mothers and fathers, sons and daughters, brothers and sisters. These are real people who sadly are passing away. And Mayor, are you bracing for the death toll to continue to rise, given the fact that the number of cases is going up?
Well, that's the concern, Wolf. I mean, look, I've been following these numbers on a daily basis since the first week in March. And from March, April, May, June, the numbers keep going up exponentially. We need to get on top of it. You know, my prayers and thoughts with the people in the Valley in South Texas. But, you know, I am concerned when we're reporting 1,300 cases today. Yesterday, it was 1,045. So the numbers in the virus is running rampant still in the community. Now, the positivity rate is going down. Our hospitals have pledged.
With the delivery of instruction, that's difficult.
Minnehaha Academy is one local school that's already committed to having kids come back. School leaders have changed traffic flow patterns in the halls, set up hygiene stations, and worked on improving its air filtration system. It's also changed how it'll teach, hiring extra staff and splitting kids into small groups. Changes President Dr. Donna Harris says have made instruction even better.
Every school has to see these challenges as opportunities, move through COVID, but there will likely be some things that stick.
A dozen new families in the last few weeks have asked about admission, and local parents say several other private schools now have waiting lists. Still others say they won't decide their plans until the state does.
Again, that was Janelle Klein reporting from KARE 11. Former presidential candidate and restaurateur Herman Cain has died from COVID-19. News of Cain's passing came by way of an obituary from his verified Twitter account. The 74-year-old former CEO of Godfather's Pizza was hospitalized earlier this month. As a co-chair of Black Voices for Trump, Cain was one of the surrogates at the president's June rally in Tulsa, Oklahoma. At least 8 Trump advance team staffers there did test positive for the virus. However, it's unknown where Cain contracted the virus. A slimmed-down Democratic National Convention schedule has been announced. It's going to remain a 4-day event beginning August 17th, and while Milwaukee remains the host city, most of that convention will be virtual, with most delegates and members of Congress asked not to attend. Joe Biden will be nominated as the Democratic nominee in a virtual roll call vote on Tuesday that week. Most speeches and convention business will originate from venues around the country. And United Parcel Service reports that the coronavirus pandemic has led to a record number of deliveries. Today, the company reported a second quarter profit of $1.77 billion. UPS states shipping volume jumped 22%, with more than 21 million packages shipped daily. That is the largest quarterly increase ever recorded by the company. Home deliveries were up 65% over the same time last year. A lot of you with boxes to break down, probably not surprised by that announcement. Stay with us. We're going to be back with another check on your forecast, more from Tyler. And we've got a guest coming up here in just a few minutes who's going to be letting us know more about something that happens more frequently than we realize in our own backyard. We'll be right back.
America, we want to help get you back to
1,000 Americans who had their lives taken by this horrible, invisible enemy. We mourn their loss as a nation. We mourn their loss as people that love one another. And we're working very hard to not only contain this horrible event, this horrible plague, it's what it is a plague, but also to come up with therapeutics and vaccines, and we're making a lot of strides. All over the world, they're having tremendous problems. A resurgence has taken place in many countries that people thought were doing well. Despite a wide range of approaches to the pandemic between countries, this resurgence in cases is occurring throughout large portions of our planet. In Japan, China, Australia, Belgium, Spain, France, Germany, Hong Kong, places where they thought they've really done great. It came back, and in a couple of cases came back very strongly. The virus was said to be under control, but new cases have risen very significantly once again. So when you think somebody's doing well, sometimes you have to hold your decision on that. You have to hold your statement. Since the beginning of June, daily new cases have increased by a factor of 14 times in Israel, 35 times, that's 35 times in Japan, and nearly 30 times in Australia, just to name a few. These were countries that were doing incredibly well. Leadership was being praised. Latin America now leads the world in confirmed infections. And with the scarcity of testing in Latin America, the true numbers, you have no idea what they might be. And I can say scarcity of testing almost anywhere except for our country. This disease is highly contagious and presents unique challenges to our border states. Meanwhile, contagious and presents unique challenges to our border states. Meanwhile, states like California, Washington State, Maryland, Virginia, Nevada, Illinois, Oregon, and many others, they were thought to be doing well, and they had a big resurgence and were hit very hard. And governors that were extremely popular are not so popular anymore. They were held up as models to follow, and then they got hit. Now, I'm not even saying it's their fault. It's probably not their fault. It's just the way it is. That's the way it is. Highly infectious, one of the most infectious diseases that anybody has ever seen. Not since 1917, over 100 years ago, has anyone seen anything like what we're witnessing now. But these states have also seen the virus substantially rebound, and again, no one is immune. No one is immune. These facts illustrate the imposing determinant, and it is a determinant that a blanket shutdown to achieve a temporary reduction in cases is certainly not a viable long-term strategy for any country. People are starting to understand the disease now. We certainly have understood a lot about the disease that we didn't have any idea. Nobody ever saw anything like this. The primary purpose of a shutdown was to flatten the curve, ensure sufficient hospital capacity, and develop effective treatments and therapies to reduce mortality. And we've done that, but it can come rearing back when you least suspect it. We did the right thing initially. We saved millions of lives, what we did. We did the right thing. But a permanent shutdown would no longer be the answer at all. A small shutdown of certain areas, but we don't want to do that. Small shutdowns can be very helpful, but not for long periods of time. We understand what we're dealing with now, but it's a very complex situation. And I can only say, thank heaven that we are so advanced in what we're doing in terms of vaccines and therapies. We now know a great deal about the virus and how to treat it and who it targets. Almost half of the deaths come from less than 1% of our population. Think of it, half of the deaths, really a tremendous number, half of the deaths come from less than 1% of our population, those living in nursing homes and assisted living facilities. The average age of those who die from the illness is 78. We've announced very strong measures to protect those who are most vulnerable. The scientific path forward is to protect those at highest risk while allowing those at lower risk to carefully return to work and to school with appropriate precautions. I'm once again urging the American people to protect their dear family and friends and anybody who's elderly, especially if somebody's elderly and they have heart problems. But you want to protect the elderly and socially distance, wear a mask if you cannot socially distance, and practice vigorous hygiene. Everyone, even healthy young people, should be taking extraordinary care to avoid infecting those at the highest risk from this terrible disease. The elderly and those with chronic health issues have to be protected. In the current hotspots across the Sun Belt, the data is showing very encouraging signs. Arizona in particular has crossed an important threshold. For every person with the virus, we're now seeing an average of less than one additional person infected, and the numbers are coming down and coming down very substantially. They're starting to come down in Florida. Arizona is really leading away. I was in Texas yesterday, and they're starting to come down significantly, we believe, in Texas. Need another few days to figure that one out, but it looks like they're coming down very significantly. Earlier today, I visited the Red Cross headquarters to discuss plasma therapy, which is a tremendous thing that they're looking at, and they have a lot of experience with it. Potentially life-saving treatments that infuse sick patients with powerful antibodies donated by those who have recovered successfully from this disease. More than 2 million Americans have recovered from the virus, and today we're asking them to visit coronavirus.gov, and volunteer to donate plasma. We need plasma. It's something that's been very effective, and we need plasma from those that were infected and successfully recovered, as most people do. Most people do. Plasma is one of the many promising treatments my administration is accelerating. We've secured over 90% of the world's supply of remdesivir, which is terrific, an encouraging antiviral drug that can effectively block replication of the virus. We've also approved the use of the widely available steroid, which has been very successful, dexamethasone, which has shown success even in patients at more advanced stages of the disease. On July 17th, we announced a $450 million agreement with Regeneron to build manufacturing plants and hundreds of thousands of doses of its antibody treatment, which is currently in late-stage clinical trials, moving along very rapidly. That's Regeneron. As a result of such significant strides in treatment, the mortality rate in those over the age of 18 is 85% lower than it was just in April. So in a very short period of time, think of that, just 85% lower than it was in April. It's a big statement. Now I want to provide an update on our efforts to ensure a strong economic comeback, including our negotiations on Capitol Hill. Throughout this crisis, my administration has taken the most aggressive action in history to
provide abortions such as Planned Parenthood, and it would prevent the administration from...
is explained by politics. That some people think Democrats are behaving like national suffrage.
The Paycheck Protection Program alone saved over 50 million jobs. We delivered $300 billion to direct cash payments to Americans. We approved $500 billion for our hardest hit industries. $500 billion. We allowed struggling homeowners to reduce or defer their mortgage payments. And we put a nationwide moratorium on evictions from federally backed properties. It was a big thing, very big thing. We also suspended student loan payments for 6 months, and we're looking to do that additionally and for additional periods of time. As a result of these extraordinary steps by the administration, we added a record 7 million jobs in the 2 months past alone. To ensure this comeback continues, which we think it will, we had great foundation to build on. We were the strongest country in the world, nobody close. We were outdoing everybody from China. If you remember, for many years you heard that in 2019 China would surpass the United States. Well, it didn't. We gained on them very significantly. We took it to a level that nobody's ever seen, 2019. And we'll be back there very shortly. It won't take very long based on everything that we're seeing. It's not going to take very long. I think next year is going to be an excellent year, maybe one of our best years ever from an economic standpoint. We can never, ever forget the people that have been lost. We never will. We'll never forget them. Never forget what happened. This could have been stopped in China. They should have stopped it, and they didn't. But I'm asking Congress to pass additional legislation to support Americans in need. First, we want a temporary extension of expanded unemployment benefits. This will provide a critical bridge for Americans who lost their jobs to the pandemic through no fault of their own. This was not anybody's fault from the standpoint of jobs. It happened. Terrible thing happened. Could have been stopped. It happened. I want to thank Senate Republicans for fighting to extend unemployment benefits today in the face of very strong Democrat obstruction, which I'm surprised at, because this is great for our country and it's great for our workers, and it wasn't our workers' fault. Second, we're asking Democrats to work with us to find a solution that will temporarily stop evictions. We do not want people who have lost their jobs due to the virus to be evicted from their homes or apartments. We don't want that to happen. Third, we need Democrats to join us to pass additional economic relief payments for American citizens, like the payment sent directly to 160 million Americans earlier this year, which was a tremendously successful program. This money will help millions of hardworking families get by. My administration is also asking Democrats to work with us to pass $105 billion to help schools safely reopen. Children are not at the lowest risk. If you look at what's going on, the younger the better. Amazing, the immune system. But children, the lower they are in age, the lower the risk in terms of the age group itself. I tell the story that in New Jersey, with thousands and thousands of people dying, sadly dying, the governor was telling me that only one, Phil Murphy, only one died under the age of 18. That's incredible. With thousands of people that died in the state of New Jersey, one made an impact. 18, that's incredible. With thousands of people that died in the state of New Jersey, one made an impact. One died under the age of 18. Children are at the lowest risk of any age group from the virus. Indefinite school closures will inflict lasting harm to our nation's children. We must follow the science and get students safely back to school while protecting children, teachers, staff, and family. We have to remember that there's another side to this. Keeping them out of school and keeping work closed is causing death also. Economic harm, but causing death for different reasons, but death. Probably more death. If governors do not want to open the public schools, the money should go to parents so they can send their children to the school of their choice. So we say if a school doesn't want to open, or if a governor doesn't want to open, maybe for political reason and maybe not, but there is some of that going on. The money should go to the parents so they can send their children to the school of their choice. If schools stay closed, the money should follow the students so families are in control of decisions about their sons and daughters, about their children. But to pass a bill, Democrats must reject the extreme partisan voices in their party. They have tremendous voices. They're looking at November 3rd. And probably a day later, they'll say, let's open up the country. But the Democrats have to reject the extreme partisan voices in their party so that we can get our country going even quicker than it's going right now. We have a lot opening, and we have a lot of states that you thought were doing pretty poorly from the standpoint of the virus, and they're actually coming back very strong. This pandemic has underscored the importance of economic policies that put American families and workers first. Got elected on the fact that I put America first. For many, many decades, in my opinion, we put America last. If you look at the crazy, horrible, disgraceful trade deals that we've watched for many years destroy our country. NAFTA, we terminated it.
The Johnsons help us all rate
people that schools will be safely reopened.
So can you assure anybody of anything? I do say, again, young people are almost immune to this disease. The younger, the better. I guess they're stronger. They're stronger. They have a stronger immune system. It's an incredible thing. Nobody's ever seen this before. Various types of flu will hurt young people more than older people. Incredible thing. Nobody's ever seen this before. Various types of flu will hurt young people more than older people. But young people are almost immune. If you look at the percentage, it's a tiny percent of 1%. It's a tiny percent of 1%. So we have to have our schools open. We have to protect our teachers. We have to protect our elderly, but we do have to have our schools open.
Mr. President?
Yeah, please, go ahead.
Mr. President, a week ago you said you're in the process of developing a strategy that's going to be very powerful involving the coronavirus. Where is that strategy?
Well, I think you're seeing it, and I think you will see it. And one of the things that we've done that we're getting, it hasn't been utilized fully yet, but we're all set to march when it comes to the vaccine. We have great therapeutics that are testing very well. And we have great vaccines from incredible companies, Johnson & Johnson and Pfizer and Merck and all of these great companies, and they're doing very well. And the delivery system is all set. Logistically, we have a general that's all he does is deliver things, whether it's soldiers or other items. And I think you're going to see something that's going to be spectacular. The FDA has approved things at a rate that's a tiny fraction of what it would take during another administration, let's say. We are way ahead on vaccines, way ahead on therapeutics, and when we have it, we're all set up with our platforms to deliver them very, very quickly. The vaccines are doing well, the therapeutics are doing well, and we're all set to deliver them as soon as we have them, and that's going to be very soon. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Are you concerned?
Well, we've got a lot of fact checks to unpack on this one. This was a particularly rough day, I think, for the president. In fact, joining me now is Kristen Welker, also Dr. Vin Gupta, pulmonologist, pandemics consultant, and NBC News medical contributor. So where to begin? Kristen, I want to start with you here on a few things, but let me roll through some fact checks. I'm going to save the virus fact check for Dr. Gupta, so let's not steal his thunder there on those other countries. But I want to go through some of the political fact checks here. He spent a long time about Joe Biden and fracking. Here's the truth about Biden. Biden actually has said he does not want to see a fracking ban. But what is true, according to many folks who have done these fact checks, is that the former vice president said he wants to stop new permits for fracking. So a little bit of a reminder there. But there were quite a few others, and let me just throw through a bunch of them here.
In this briefing, casting as much doubt as possible on the process. President Trump setting off another round of furious blowback with the tweet suggesting the election be postponed because of mail-in voting. The president saying, delay the election until people can properly, securely, and safely vote. It was a suggestion the president's challenger, Joe Biden, predicted more than 3 months ago in a teleconference saying, mark my words, I think he is going to try to kick back the election window somehow, come up with some rationale why it can't be held. The president has no power to delay the election. That's an issue for Congress. But even the president's Republican colleagues shot down the idea.
We'll cope with whatever the situation is and have the election on November 3rd as already scheduled.
The president's critics accused him of throwing a political hand grenade to distract from today's economic numbers, showing the U.S. economy shrank at an annualized 32.9% between April and June, the worst in history.
The president is very simply desperate. These new economic numbers, combined with the poll numbers, are making him petrified of the results of a fair, free election on time.
President Trump got some comfort on an expansion of mail-in voting from his closest allies in Congress, but not much more than that.
I understand the president's concern about mail-in voting, which is different than absentee voting. But never in the history of the federal elections have we ever not held an election, and we should go forward with our election.
It felt pretty bad. On coronavirus, President Trump visited Red Cross headquarters today, promoting the promise of so-called convalescent plasma, antibodies taken from patients who have recovered from coronavirus that can be used.
President who has been beleaguered and beaten down. He did not have the usual edge to his bluster. He went on a riff about, well, other countries are getting it too. It's China's fault. It's only hitting a tiny percentage of the population. Even the popular governors have seen things go in the wrong direction. A sort of extended, it's not me, it's not my fault kind of a riff. I thought that was striking. You know, he woke up to the news this morning that his ally Herman Cain, somebody who had gone to that Tulsa rally, appeared without a mask, later contracted coronavirus. Don't know where he got it, but he had a long battle in the hospital and he passed away today. That had to have hit the president hard, and I was struck by how some of the wind seemed to have come out of his sails today, even when he was talking about the economy, saying, you know, well, we think it's going to come back, we hope it's going to come back. Obviously, the economy's in very difficult strait. We got terrible economic news, affirming terrible economic news. We already knew we'd had a terrible second quarter, but it now looks like we're going to have a hit to the jobs numbers next week. And I think the president recognizes that the news is pretty bad across all fronts, and one of the crystallizing moments for that was when he was asked, in light of the setbacks with Major League Sports, baseball having to cancel games because of cases on their teams, he said, can you reassure Americans they can safely reopen schools? And he said, can you really reassure people of anything? That struck me as a man who knows he's not in control of events right now.
Yeah, he opened with a very nice statement expressing deepest condolences to Herman Cain, which is totally appropriate. He didn't utter a word about Congressman John Lewis. He certainly could have said something about the late congressman who was buried earlier today down in Atlanta. You know, I want to bring in Sanjay. Dr. Sanjay Gupta is with us as well. Sanjay, I don't know if the president really appreciates, yes, kids are less vulnerable. They can be asymptomatic or have very minor symptoms, but they can, especially if they're 10 and older, according to one study from South Korea, they can pass along this virus to their parents, their grandparents, other adults with underlying health conditions as easily as adults can transmit this virus. I don't know if the president appreciates that.
No, I think that's the critical point here. I think what has held up since we looked at the initial sort of early data from Wuhan is that young kids in particular do seem less likely to get ill or certainly seriously ill from that. And by the way, that is different. You know, you think about flu virus and typically it's the very young and the very old that are the most likely to get sick. So this respiratory virus does behave differently than other respiratory viruses. But Wolf, you're absolutely right. It was a really interesting, well-done study out of South Korea. They did contact tracing where they actually traced these, in that case, kids of all these different ages, and found kids 10 and older were just as likely to transmit the virus as adults. That's the big concern, because adults may be teachers, faculty, parents, grandparents. As far as kids younger than 10, Wolf, and there was a new study today saying that they have a lot of virus still, even in younger kids, that is located in their mouth and their nose. That's what they're seeing on these studies. So they have the virus, they're harboring it in their nose and their mouth, and it's still not entirely clear just how much younger kids spread it. Keep in mind, Wolf, kids, especially young kids, have largely been at home in this country, many countries around the world, since March. So we don't have a lot of data on younger kids, and I think that's part of the issue here. The way that we're going to find out, I think, is as kids start to return to school in some areas, you got to worry about the fact that there may be some outbreaks and how you're going to control those.
Yeah, and let's bring Gloria Borger into this conversation as well. Let's get back to the president's suggestions that maybe it's necessary to delay the November 3rd presidential election, because he says if there's a lot of voting by mail, it will be fraudulent, it'll take a long time to determine, might take as many as years to determine when. He doesn't want to see that happening. It sounds, Gloria, like he doesn't know there are a whole bunch of states that have been doing voting by mail for a long time, including a state like Utah, for example, right. Oregon, and a whole bunch of other states have a lot of voting by mail. And at a time of coronavirus, when people are afraid to go, let's say, to a voting booth, wait in line, voting by mail has been very effective and not controversial over many, many elections.
Well, and these are a lot of red states, too, Wolf, that have a lot of voting by mail. Look, this is a president who doesn't want to admit that it's gone very well in those states. And if you take a step back, what we heard today was kind of stunning. Because from the podium at the White House, you had a United States president deliberately undermining the potential results of a presidential election. Think about that. In advance of the votes being cast or counted, the president is saying it's going to be rigged. It's going to wind up in court. And I agree with what John Harwood was saying. This is a president who seems to feel demoralized when you heard him today. He read the statistics with all the enthusiasm of somebody reading the phone book today. And he didn't disavow entirely the case he made about wanting to delay the election. He said, sure, I don't want to delay the election, but just understand that it's going to be rigged. So he's setting the country up right now for more divisiveness, not to accept any kind of results in this election. And one more thing, Wolf, he said, you know, I want to know what the result is going to be on election night. I'm not going to wait around sounding like, well, he wanted to have his party or he wanted to go home, one way or the other, even though Republicans and official Republicans in the campaign have said, look, we understand that we're going to have to wait in some states, but not the president. He wants to know, just like the good old days, he wants to know that night and find out what it is. Otherwise, as he hinted, you know what? It's a mess. It's going to wind up in court. It's going to be litigated. It's going to take years. I mean, it's kind of...
House reads books about submarines.
He's spinning the bully Rubik's Cube right now, trying to find the right colors.
Kristen Welker, Dr. Vin Gupta, and Anthony Scaramucci having to play cleanup after the president's remarks. I appreciate all of you doing our best to try to fact-check him as best we could. That does it for me.
As then for tonight, we're looking lows in the low 60s with very light winds. Then tomorrow during the day, mostly sunny.
Think about it,
we'll be here.
Opening up the Jeopardy Vault to feature an...
Absolutely. Let me go back to Caitlin, because she was watching all of this so very, very closely. Caitlin, you know, he did come out without a lot of energy, reading a statement that was clearly prepared, and I don't think he necessarily appreciates how awful the U.S. economy is right now. These numbers from the Commerce Department coming in today that on an annual rate, 32.9% collapse of the economy in the second quarter from April through June. Another 1.4 million Americans just last week had to apply for unemployment. Millions of Americans right now are in deep trouble. And he's suggesting, well, it's going to have a huge rebound. It's going to be great. Right now, it's terrible.
Yeah, and there's no bounce in sight. I mean, looking at those numbers about the economic output and how it dropped, and also talking about unemployment numbers, which did not change for 2 weeks. It didn't even go down a little bit. That's raising a lot of concern for people. And of course, well, one thing the president did note is the fact that Congress is still in a deadlock over what to do about this next coronavirus relief bill. Those millions of Americans who are going to lose their enhanced unemployment benefits starting tomorrow. And now the Senate has adjourned. They're not going to come to any kind of conclusion. The Chief of Staff, Mark Meadows, is up on Capitol Hill. He's not signaling any optimism either, and that's very concerning because this actually affects people's day-to-day lives. And what you heard the president lay out there, what he was suggesting, extending for what the White House wants to see in that bill, is really what we heard the president say 24 hours ago, yesterday morning when he was leaving the White House. And so that hasn't changed. It doesn't appear that needle has moved any. But, well, if you're talking about, the president being here at the White House, he was talking about his friend Herman Cain, who passed away. He did not mention, we should note, the fact that Herman Cain had recently attended one of his own rallies, an indoor rally in Oklahoma, where a lot of people were not wearing masks and they were shouting and chanting. And of course, so many people tested positive for coronavirus after that. But he also did not get asked about what his predecessor said today. Barack Obama at the funeral for John Lewis, as he was eulogizing him, where he had some pretty stinging attacks on President Trump and what he's been trying to say about mail-in ballots and about voting rights. He was really lashing into the president, and Trump did not get asked about that, which I thought was pretty notable because, he was the only living president not to attend that funeral today. Bush spoke, President Obama spoke, and President Clinton spoke. Jimmy Carter was not there because he's not traveling for health reasons, but it was really striking to see President Trump not be at that funeral speaking next to those other presidents, and instead is here back at the White House and did not comment on John Lewis's funeral at all today. Yeah, and John Harwood, it was the words of the former president, Barack Obama, at that funeral. He didn't mention the president by name, but it was clear who he was addressing those words to. At one point, saying, even as we sit here, there are those in power who are doing their darndest to discourage people from voting by closing polling locations and targeting minorities and students with restrictive ID laws, and attacking our voting rights with surgical precision, even undermining the Postal Service in the run to an election. It's going to be dependent on mail-in ballots so people don't get sick. They will get sick in the middle of a coronavirus pandemic if they have to go to polling stations and wait in line with a lot of people around there on Election Day, November 3rd. Potentially, it's very, very dangerous.
Well, there's no question about it, and the President Obama's words were incredibly stinging today. He invoked the specter of Bull Connor and George Wallace, who were racist figures who were involved on the wrong side of the civil rights movement, trying to stop integration, trying to stop voting rights, the violence against protesters then, and that has incredible weight at this moment because you have a president who's running a campaign of naked racism. He yesterday revoked a fair housing regulation and linked it, fair housing, that is racial integration, to crime and low-income people. He's tweeted out somebody saying white power. This is stuff that would be jolting even in John Lewis's era, but now it is incredibly out of step with where the American people are. And I think that's why it contributes to the president's sense of being beleaguered, because he's trying all these things. They're not working. They're not resonating with the American people. And I think he knows it. Also, on the negotiations with Congress, his language about the impasse shows that he understands that he's on the short side of public opinion in terms of getting aid to people, unemployment assistance and other assistance. He tried to contrast what he's doing with the crazy ideas of Democrats, but the reality is much of the Republican caucus doesn't want to do anything right now. The administration wants to do something, and the Democrats want to provide more help. They've got the leverage. Don't know how it's going to work out.
If I have done all I can to demonstrate that the way of peace, the way of love and nonviolence, is the more excellent way, now it is your turn to let freedom ring. Lewis lived that history physically. It was written onto his body. In later years, he could point to scar lines on his head and say, this was from Selma. This was from Montgomery. Brett?
Steve Harrigan, live in Atlanta. Steve, thanks. Up next, a look at the life and legacy of Herman Cain. First, here's what some of our Fox affiliates around the country are covering tonight. Fox 12 in Portland, as a Coast Guard air crew rescues 2 teenagers near Fort Stevens State Park in Hammond, Oregon. The girls were stranded on rocks, unable to paddle their inner tubes back to the starting point. Fox 28.
Delay thing may just be an entry point to an argument, largely emotional, but nevertheless immensely disruptive, to setting up a November where he is crying foul and crooked election and fake news and fake president about Joe Biden if Biden wins. The other thing to watch is, yes, those senators were saying the right thing today. What if Trump begins to make the case to them? At least 2 of them are running in races that are far closer than they would want them to be. What if he begins to make the case to the Senate Republican caucus that if the Senate were to flip on November 3rd and subsequent days, what if it becomes in their interest to join him in questioning the legitimacy of an election that puts them out of work?
Well, you're raising so many things, John. I want to
immense question.
I want to slow you down for follow-up, because you've got more than one interesting thing there. On the departure, again, we do the legal facts. And so when you talk about whether this is a bid for him to try to have leverage over delay, we go, of course, and we think of the 20th Amendment. And I'll put it up so everyone can remember what we're dealing with. Some of these things have already been thought through. The terms of the vice president and president end at noon on the 20th day of January, John. An amendment that further clarifies and cannot be changed by the president or Congress that you're out no matter what.
Okay, I may end up seeming alarmist here, but this seems to be a moment for at least a measure of alarmism.
You are known, John. I'm going to give you the mic back, but we welcome you. If you are feeling the facts lead you to alarmism, you are known by some as a genteel and courtly presence over the decades on air. So if today is the day, the night you want to be alarmist, go for it. I'll go you, and then Christina, and then we have a Biden campaign person who's going to be responding to some of this. So you and then Christina.
Sure. I think that, yes, the 20th Amendment passes that, institutes that. But we've never had anyone challenge it. Remember, the Constitution, in fact, depends on people of sufficient goodwill that the norms work. So, really interesting question. Let's say the president is suing 35 states that he loses in court. Through November and December into January. Again, I hope none of this happens, but I think we have to think about it because, again, Donald Trump is president, so we have to think about everything. He's suing the states. He says, no, I don't believe Joe Biden is president. How does he get removed from the premises? Yes, people can say that that Biden and whomever are now in office, but does the military chain of command come into being? Does the uniformed Secret Service come into being? The Electoral College, to my knowledge, has no enforcement mechanism except people who accept that this country has gone from strength to strength for people who defer to the law.
Let me bring Christina in as promised. Now I feel like, are we on the beat or are we on an episode of 24 where the Secret Service march the defiant president off? This is what John Meacham's bringing tonight, also known as Hot Fire. Christina, you get the final word in this topic.
Right. So I understand John's alarm, and I have some of those concerns as well. And we realize so much that's in the Constitution is based purely on norms, and there isn't really any implementation guide there. And I definitely believe that we can't necessarily put our faith in our Republican Senate colleagues to do the right thing, because we have seen them abdicate to the president so quickly. But I do think that, this is what Donald Trump was trying to set up in 2016 to call into question as to whether or not he would accept the election results when he was pretty sure that Hillary Clinton would win. So yes, we do need a 1972 style blowout, this time for the Democrats, for Joe Biden to definitively win, but also we need a lot of Republicans to stand up and respect the Constitution over a man who does not. And we haven't seen that in the past 3.5 years.
Of coronavirus nationwide. For the third night in a row, Florida has broken a record for deaths in a single day. The virus is also hitting home for the president. Herman Cain, one of his staunchest supporters and a former Republican presidential candidate, has died from COVID-19 6 weeks after attending a packed rally for the president. Well, as we come on the air, more than 151,000 people have been killed by the virus here in the U.S., and there are more than 4 million confirmed cases nationwide. It all comes as the American economy suffered another crushing blow today. The GDP dropped nearly 10%, falling at its fastest pace in history. Well, there's a lot to get to tonight. We have a team, of course.
John Lewis was a walking rebuke to people who thought, well, we ain't there yet. We've been working a long time. Isn't it time to bag it? He kept moving.
Listen, John and I had our disagreements, of course. But in the America John Lewis fought for, and the America I believe in, differences of opinion are inevitable elements and evidence of democracy in action.
His relationship with President Barack Obama was an important one. Like many black Americans, Lewis was in tears the night history was made and Obama was elected. In his eulogy, Obama pointed to this important moment, the bloody Sunday on this bridge in Alabama, when Lewis nearly lost his life at the hands of police while marching for voting rights. It was months later when the laws changed and many in his own family were able to vote for the first time.
This idea that any of us, ordinary people, a young kid from Troy, can stand up to the powers and principalities and say, no, this isn't right, this isn't true, this isn't just. We can do better. America was built by people like that. America was built by John Lewis's.
The former president argued that forces are still trying to suppress the vote today, right now, in November's election.
Even as we sit here, there are those in power who are doing their darndest to discourage people from voting by closing polling locations and targeting minorities and students with restrictive ID laws and attacking our voting rights with surgical precision, even undermining the Postal Service in the run-up to an election that's going to be dependent on mail-in ballots so people don't get sick.
Outside, people watched and waved in the heat. Lewis was beloved and was buried tonight in an Atlanta cemetery founded by freed slaves who at the time had nowhere else to bury their dead with dignity. The final resting place for a man of so much purpose.
Lead me
And Steve Osunsami with us here in Atlanta tonight. And Steve, I know you have interviewed John Lewis along the way, and there were so many gathered outside the church here, as you know. One woman telling me in a word that he was humble, direct, and that he fought right until the very end.
Well, David, we are, of course, in his congressional district, and he was beloved, and not just by black residents, but by white residents, women, gays. In fact, his family made sure that as his body was being moved to the streets of Atlanta, that they passed through the heart of gay Atlanta. And it's all because he spent his entire life fighting for others. David?
Steve Osunsami leading us off tonight. Steve, thank you. And just hours before the service began, President Trump, who did not attend, did send out a tweet suggesting that Election Day be delayed. It set off a firestorm, even Republican leaders jumping in and quickly to try to put this to rest. Here's Terry Moran tonight on that.
No president has ever said anything like it, but President Trump, behind in the polls with a cratering economy and a pandemic out of control, tweeting today, with universal mail-in voting, 2020 will be the most inaccurate and fraudulent election in history. It will be a great embarrassment to the USA. Delay the election until people can properly, securely, and safely vote. Later, the president tried to explain what he meant.
Do I want to see a date change? No, but I don't want to see a crooked election. This election will be the most rigged election in history if that happens.
That's a flip-flop. In April, Trump said this.
I never even thought of changing the date of the election. Why would I do that? November 3rd. It's a good number. No, I look forward to that election.
Trump's statement today about delaying an American election was shot down immediately by Democrats and Republicans. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell in an interview in Kentucky.
Never in the history of the country, through wars, depressions, and the Civil War, have we ever not had a federally scheduled election on time.
But Joe Biden has been warning for weeks Trump might try to use the pandemic to delay or delegitimize the election.
It's my greatest concern, my single greatest concern. This president's going to try to steal this election. This is the guy who said that all mail-in ballots are fraudulent, voting by mail, while he sits behind the desk in the Oval Office and writes his mail-in ballot to vote in the primary.
And Terry Moran with us tonight. And Terry, I know amid all this talk about mail-in ballots and election security, that ABC News did reach out to election officials in all 50 states, Democrats and Republicans, about whether they're concerned about mail-in voting.
That's right, David. We've heard from 27 of those top election officials across the country, and not one of them, Republican or Democrat, has expressed any concern that mail-in voting would cause any significant fraud in their states. It's also worth noting, David,
the COVID-19 testing sites statewide that are run by the state and the federal government are being closed. In fact, they're being torn down right now because there's a storm on the way. SIOUX, it's a tropical storm headed toward Florida, could be a hurricane by tomorrow. As of
3-4, that's 800.
We are buying American and making sure that the future is made in America and made in all of America. And we know that, you know, I heard Donald Trump from the Rose Garden recently talk about supply chains and buying American and America first. But who is he talking about? Because when Joe Biden talks about putting America first, he is talking about the American people. When Donald Trump talks about it, it seems to be that he is talking about American corporations.
Right. Right. Well, look, these are all really important issues, which is why we're glad to get everybody on. And Simone, full disclosure, I'll let you know that in the coming days we have a Trump campaign surrogate on. We'll hear their view. We'll be coming back to you. And like shampoo, rinse and repeat until November, so everyone hears.
To make a difference. Get ready to shape your world. Enroll in.
And like most of the crowd, did not wear a mask. He tested positive for COVID 9 days later.
Shucky ducky.
Cain was known for his catchphrases.
Shucky ducky kind of crowd.
And for his exuberance. He was CEO of Godfather's Pizza and chaired the Federal Reserve Bank of Kansas City.
999.
When he entered politics, he became the GOP presidential frontrunner in 2012 before sexual harassment allegations ended his campaign.
Obviously a man of great energy.
The eventual nominee, Mitt Romney, paid tribute to Cain today.
When he reaches St. Peter's Gate, I expect the first words to come out of his mouth will be 999.
Those close to Cain say that it's unclear where he contracted the virus and that he made a series of trips last month. President Trump called him an American patriot and a great friend. Herman Cain was 74, Nora.
Nancy Cordes, thank you. We turn now to that tweet from President Trump today, raising the possibility of putting off the November elections, even though only Congress has that power. Well, tonight, leaders of the president's own party are rejecting the idea. Here's CBS's Ben Tracy.
President Trump's stunning suggestion that the election be delayed comes as he's trailing badly in the polls, and at the same time the nation's GDP reached a historic low. In a remarkable tweet, he made the unfounded claim that mail-in voting will make the election the most inaccurate and fraudulent in history, and suggested a delay until people can properly, securely, and safely vote.
I don't want to delay. I want to have the election. But I also don't want to have to wait for 3 months and then find out that the ballots are all missing and the election doesn't mean anything.
The president has no power to delay an election. The Constitution says only Congress can change the date, and mail-in voter fraud, repeatedly cited by Mr. Trump, is extremely rare. Today, the top Republicans in Congress rebuked the idea.
We'll cope with whatever the situation is and have the election on November 3rd as already scheduled.
Never in the history of the federal elections have we ever not held an election, and we should go forward with our election.
In April, former Vice President Joe Biden predicted the president would try to move the election. The president's tweet came as John Lewis, a man who spent his life fighting for voting rights, was laid to rest. Democratic Representative James Clyburn, a longtime friend, called the president's suggestion of a delayed election the most despicable affront to Lewis's memory and legacy. Despite questioning the safety of holding an election during coronavirus, the president continues to push for schools to reopen, saying there isn't much risk to children.
The younger, the better. Amazing, the immune system. For children, the lower they are in age, the lower the risk.
The president was asked during that briefing tonight if, given the outbreaks of coronavirus in Major League Baseball, can he really assure people that schools will be safe? The president responded by saying, "Can you assure anybody of anything?" Nora.
Ben Tracy from the White House tonight. Thank you, Ben. Coronavirus hasn't...
Like on your roof.
Helping the world keep...
On one of the Mueller convictions most pivotal to President Trump. This is coming from one of the most powerful federal appeals courts in the nation. Today, brushing back Barr's attempt to cancel the guilty plea of former Trump aide Michael Flynn. The full federal appeals court in Washington making the rare ruling to keep the case open, which means Flynn could still be sentenced, even go to jail potentially. The ruling erases what had been the last word on the matter, a recent ruling that was going to allow the Trump DOJ to rescue Flynn from his conviction. A couple points here you might want to know. First, you don't need to be a legal expert to realize prosecutors do not usually win convictions and then go to court to take them back. That's what Barr did, a move that made it look like the Trump Barr operation was to just help a political ally and undercut Mueller, who even recently spoke out against Trump's commutation for Roger Stone. Second, this decision comes after a ruling that Barr's DOJ abused power to retaliate against Michael Cohen. Now, these judges may be concerned about that very pattern. The New York Times reported today how a former mafia prosecutor filed a scathing brief contending the Trump DOJ's rationale made no sense and must be cover for a corrupt and politically motivated decision. The judges could still allow Flynn's...
Alberto, thank you so much for joining us. I know you got a lot going on right now. You just heard the breaking news. The University of Washington Medical School now projects there will be 230,000 plus 230,822 U.S. deaths from coronavirus by November. That's up from last week's forecast of 219,000 deaths. What's your reaction to these sobering projections 151,000 Americans so far have done?
As an American citizen, as a father, as a member of this community, I have to be appalled because I have to believe that some of these deaths were absolutely preventable. Look, Wolf, I think that's why we made a decision that we made yesterday. With increased mortality, with increased morbidity in our community, specific to COVID-19, with a positivity rate close to 18%, we made the difficult but prudent decision of actually delaying the start of our school year by 1 week and starting 100% online because we protect and prioritize the well-being and the health of our students and our workforce.
You heard the president just now over at the White House, Alberto, pushing very hard for all the schools to reopen as quick, immediately, basically, even as there's a new record for coronavirus deaths in your state, Florida, that's happening, 3 days in a row right now. And as you point out, you've decided to delay reopening schools in Miami-Dade County because out of safety for the kids, right?
It's the right decision at the right time, considering the circumstances here locally. Look, as I said, when you look at the ICU capacity in our local hospitals, the number of hospitalizations, the positivity rate, which is at 18%, when the recommended minimum acceptable rate for a return to schools being at 10% towards a 5%. And knowing that the clock is running out, our first day of school was scheduled to be August 24th. We are less than 1 month away, and the statistical probability that those numbers, that curve would actually reach a point that would be safe for us to return students and teachers back to the classroom became really unreasonable.
Live.
Isn't that what I said?
No.
And all kinds of people, left and right, responded to that. Meantime, there was other news today on the economy front. The real GDP decreasing at an annual rate of 32.9% in the second quarter. Obviously, the shutdown and COVID affecting all of this, but it's massive. It's historic compared to a decrease of 5% in Q1. But that's not what everybody's talking about. Everybody's talking about the president's tweet about possibly delaying the election. Let's bring in our panel. Matthew Continetti, founding editor of the Washington Free Beacon, Susan Page, Washington bureau chief at USA Today, and Bill McGurran, columnist for the Wall Street Journal. Bill, what do you think about this whole dust-up and the president's explanation at the news conference?
Well, look, I think he's right about in terms of the delays that we've had in primary results, election results. This is not a good thing. It's amazing that the more advanced we are in technology, the less capable we seem to be of getting results tonight. As you pointed out, he doesn't have the legal authority to postpone the elections. You know, part of me wonders if this isn't like his thing on COVID about federalism, to say one thing and get all the Democrats to agree we don't want any delay in elections. I mean, sometimes it just seems to me he takes a big meaty bone and he throws it off in an area and everyone goes running after it. You know, as you say, it's not going to happen because of the law, and but I think there are some legitimate complaints about possible fraud, about what happens if all across the country we get competing versions of results. That's not a good thing for democracy.
You know, I'll just play some of the reaction, and it was all over the board, Susan. Here's a few lawmakers.
There's no way legally the President of the United States can cancel, delay, postpone the election. It's unconstitutional.
I realize he talked to Vladimir Putin the other day, but I don't even think Putin would try to convince him to do that.
Never in the history of the country, through wars and depressions and the Civil War, have we ever not had a federally scheduled election on time, and we'll find a way to do that again this November 3rd.
Susan, it was pretty amazing how many people were asked about it, how many people weighed in. I mean, it really did overtake the news cycle.
You know, one thing that's not going to happen this year, we're not going to delay the election. But I think you were right on point in your introduction. The provocative tweet about this came 16 minutes after the devastating announcement of the contraction in the economy in the second quarter. And if you're looking for news developments today that will affect what happens on election day, the state of the economy is going to be more important than the president's tweet about possibly delaying the election.
Yeah. Matthew?
I think all the panelists make good points. Was one thing that President Trump may have been trying to do also was justify a loss if he loses in November, to say that this was a rigged election and that he never had a shot because of the fake ballots. And so it gives him a good story. But, you know, the thing is, the more he discounts mail-in ballots, the more he delegitimizes the election process, I think the more it hurts his chances. It would be better if I think for his election chances if he took more of an affirmative effort to bolster the election process, more polling places, make sure there are no delays, and reassert the importance of American institutions.
Yeah, you know, and we've put out this word, and we've done a few stories about it, that no matter where we are on mail-in ballots by the time November election comes around, it's very likely we're not going to have a decision on election night, or even a few days. And that's something that people have to get their head around, including this president, but we'll see where it goes. Meantime, the former president, Barack Obama, as well as George W. Bush and former President Clinton, eulogizing the late Congressman John Lewis. Take a listen to former President Obama at one point in that eulogy.
There are those in power who are doing their darndest to discourage people from voting by closing polling locations and targeting minorities and students with restrictive ID laws and attacking our voting rights with surgical precision, even undermining the Postal Service in the run-up to an election that's going to be dependent on mail-in ballots so people don't get sick.
Now, Bill, you know, it obviously was stirring, and it had a lot of progressive policies in this speech, and it was a tribute to John Lewis. But flipped around, had this happened on the Republican side of this kind of eulogy, I wonder what the reaction would have been.
No, we don't have to wonder. We know it would be a lot of, you know, condemnation. I have to say, you know, John Lewis did incredibly brave things early in his career, was a real champion. And as he's being laid to rest, there's been a lot of bipartisan support for him from conservatives and Republicans and respectful. And I have to say, I compare that to the reaction, at least that I saw on Twitter, to Herman Cain's death, which seems, some of it is so repellent, suggesting he deserved it. I mean, two extraordinary men who lived quite extraordinary lives, and it's just dispiriting to see that kind of difference.
Yeah, and you know, the celebration of John Lewis's life over the past few days has been inspirational to look at. You point out Herman Cain, obviously a friend of this network, a contributor here. I had him on many times, interviewed him. One of them was on what we called center seat when he was running. Take a listen to one of the viewer questions and his answer.
If you could have lunch with anyone, dead or alive, who would it be and why?
Martin Luther King Jr., because he was one of the greatest leaders of our time and in history.
Think about Herman Cain, his life and legacy.
You know, Herman Cain was a big personality. He wore that big black hat. He had a big laugh. You could tell why he had been a successful businessman with the way he was compelling to watch. You know, people forget that there was a brief period during the 2012 election when he was leading the Republican field, and his 999 tax plan, remember that, got a lot of attention. So sorry, we're so saddened to hear that he has died.
Herman Cain, I think, paved the way for Donald Trump, Brett. A businessman, outsider with bold, disruptive ideas. He caught the imagination of the Republican Party in 2012. 4 years later, the Republican Party nominated another brash businessman with bold ideas.
Yeah. Well, our condolences to his family. He was quite a character and obviously had quite an interesting run in presidential politics. Panel.
Snow Al Roker, if you know, you know. How did that feel?
You know, when my daughter told me, she said, "Dad, push a T?"
The Democrats, the Republicans. Watch it all go down live. Stay with CNN.
John Lewis wrote that when he decided to run for office, Lillian was his chief advisor, in on every major decision I made.
She got in there and became his best defender, his best ally, his best supporter, and would jump on people if they had critical things to say about John.
Lillian died in 2012 on New Year's Eve, 45 years to the day that she met her husband.
I think he's ready to go see Lillian again.
John and Lillian's first home was a small home here in Atlanta, and they never moved away. Tonight, they are reunited for eternity. We'll be right back.
This portion of the CBS.
It will not look or feel like August. 70s are back, guys.
Great days to get out and do all those chores outside you've been putting off. MSNBC Nightly News is next.
Dakota News Now will continue in 2 minutes over on KSFY. Good night now from the courthouse.
It's the finish line. How to travel smart, eat smart, have fun.
Willard Scott on the Today Show. And then I think around the late 90s, am I wrong, Al? You took over in the Today Show and you followed his footsteps. Didn't he mentor?
It's the best time to get into a new...
As I pass along. He loved America until America learned how to love him back.
In the America John Lewis fought for, and the America I believe in, differences of opinion are inevitable elements and evidence of democracy in action.
We got our last letter today on the pages of the New York Times. Keep moving. It is so fitting on the day of his service, he leaves us our marching orders. Keep moving.
It was a double rainbow over the casket. And for us, it was, we waved goodbye when he started to leave us. He was telling us, I'm home in heaven.
At an early age, we recognized the wrong under which we were forced to live, and we swore to God that by God's grace, we would do whatever God called us to do in order to put on the table of the nation's agenda. This must end. Black Lives Matter.
America was built by John Lewis's. Someday when we do finish that long journey towards freedom, when we do form a more perfect union, whether it's years from now or decades or even if it takes another 2 centuries, John Lewis will be a founding father of that fuller, fairer, better America. What a gift John Lewis was. We are also lucky to have had him walk with us for a while and show us the way.
John Lewis was truly a great, great American who made our country better. I think I speak for all of our viewers here in the U.S. and around the world. Our deepest, deepest condolences to his family and his friends. May he rest in peace, and may his memory be a blessing.
Tonight, remembering the man who changed America. Congressman John Lewis, honored as a nonviolent warrior who fought for true peace. 3 former presidents there paying tribute to the man who crossed bridges and broke down barriers. Barack Obama calling him the founding father of a better America, a man who liberated all of us on the battlefield of justice. Plus, Lewis's own powerful message published today. Also tonight, backlash after President Trump floated potentially delaying the election. Many Republicans joining Democrats and pushing back on that. The president also reacting to the death of former presidential candidate Herman Cain, dying after being hospitalized with coronavirus for weeks. The important new details about kids and how they compare to adults when it comes to spreading the virus. The economic disaster, almost 1.5 million more Americans file for unemployment. Can Congress reach a deal to extend those enhanced benefits? The impact of COVID misinformation, how it's hurting the fight on the front lines. Against all odds, stricken by COVID, 2 double lung transplant survivors break their silence about their life-saving surgeries. And the NBA's rebound as the season finally resumes.
This is NBC Nightly News with Lester Holt.
Good evening, everyone. The civil rights struggles of both history and today were the backdrop for a powerful send-off for Congressman and civil rights giant John Lewis. 4 former presidents paying tribute, 3 of them in the room as family, friends, and colleagues gathered in Atlanta's historic Ebenezer Baptist Church to praise the man who nearly lost his life in the fight for voting rights. Barack Obama, whose presidency is a product of that legacy, today offered a spirited eulogy and a rebuke of those who may threaten those rights. Inside the Atlanta church where Martin Luther King Jr. once preached.
He loved America until America learned how to love him back. We celebrate John Lewis.
A powerful send-off for a man who was right there with him, fighting for freedom.
Thank you, oh God, for this great man who lived among us, who now joins the great cloud of freedom fighters. Only what you do for Christ will last.
John Lewis, born in tiny segregated Troy, Alabama, the son of sharecroppers, celebrated today by presidents, including the first black president, who says he was elected standing on Lewis's shoulders.
On Inauguration Day in 2008, 2009, he was one of the first people I greeted and hugged on that stand. And I told him, this is your day too.
Former President Obama, one of many today, calling to strengthen the Voting Rights Act that Lewis championed.
You want to honor John? Let's honor him by revitalizing the law that he was willing to die for.
And while not naming him, launching a forceful attack against President Trump.
George Wallace may be gone, but we can witness our federal government sending agents to use tear gas and batons against peaceful demonstrators.
John Lewis's own words also echoing in that church. In the extraordinary essay he submitted to the New York Times just before his death, published this morning, his message to those marching now. While my time has come to an end, he wrote, I want you to know that in the last days and hours of my life, you inspired me. Emmett Till was my George Floyd. He was my Rayshard Brooks, Sandra Bland, and Breonna Taylor. Ordinary people with extraordinary vision can redeem the soul of America by getting in what I call good trouble, necessary trouble. Though I may not be here with you, I urge you to answer the highest calling of your heart and stand up for what you truly believe.
It is so fitting on the day of his service, he leaves us our marching orders.
The tributes today, intensely personal.
When he could have been angry and determined to cancel his adversaries, he tried to get converts instead. He thought the open hand was better than the clenched fist. I just loved him. I always will. And I'm so grateful that he stayed true to form. He's gone up yonder and left us with marching orders. I suggest, since he's close enough to God to keep his eye on the sparrow and us, we salute, suit up, and march on.
Emotional.
The night that John passed. When this flag flew there, it said goodbye. It waved goodbye to John, our friend, our mentor, our colleague.
And candid.
Listen, John and I had our disagreements, of course. But in the America John Lewis fought for, and the America I believe in, differences of opinion are inevitable elements and evidence of democracy in action. We live in a better and nobler country today because of John Lewis.
I'm the master of my fate.
Including a tribute from a 12-year-old boy Lewis met at the anniversary of the Selma March.
John Lewis was my hero, my friend. Let's honor him by getting in good trouble.
He was willing to get in good trouble. A celebration of that unbreakable spirit.
America was built by John Lewis's. And someday when we do finish that long journey towards freedom, when we do form a more perfect union, whether it's years from now or decades or even if it takes another 2 centuries, John Lewis will be a founding father of that fuller, fairer, better America.
John Lewis is being laid to rest alongside his wife of 44 years, Lillian. A strong backlash tonight after President Trump suggested that this fall's election could be delayed over his concerns about mail-in voting. NBC's Peter Alexander has more on that from the White House.
Facing a surging pandemic and struggling in the polls, President Trump today for the first time is suggesting the November election, just 96 days away, be postponed. Tweeting, with universal mail-in voting, 2020 will be the most inaccurate and fraudulent election in history. Warning it will be a great embarrassment to the USA. Delay the election until people can properly, securely, and safely vote?
I don't want to delay. I want to have the election. But I also don't want to have to wait for 3 months and then find out that the ballots are all missing and the election doesn't mean anything.
But the president has no power to delay a general election. The Constitution says it's up to Congress to set the date. And with Democrats controlling the House, that will not happen. There's also no evidence of widespread voter fraud due to mail-in balloting. President Trump's suggestion immediately dismissed even by top Republicans.
We'll cope with whatever the situation is and have the election on November 3rd as already scheduled.
No.
And then, in maybe some of the most shocking behavior, he brought thousands of people together in Tulsa and in Phoenix and in Mount Rushmore during a surge in the pandemic, demonstrating really just a graven disregard for the health of the people that supported him and then protected him. So yeah, I blame the president for the death of thousands of people. Mr. Cain, I'm sorry for his loss. That's a tragedy. He made his own decisions, but he followed the lead of the president of the United States, as thousands of people do every day, as millions of people do every day.
I mean, it is tragic that this happened. And Dana, this afternoon, the president tweeted about Herman Cain's passing. He was obviously talking about him at the press conference, and he wrote, "I loved Herman Cain, a great man. Herman, rest in peace." Look, the thing is, Dana, when he heard this sad news, he had to have thought about that rally and the picture, right, where Herman Cain, 74-year-old cancer survivor, without a mask, is sitting surrounded with people at the rally. Days before he tested positive. Does this hit home to him, Dana, at all, to the president?
Yeah, of course this death hits home to him, and it was pretty clear in that tweet and in the fact that he said something at the beginning of his statement earlier this evening. But the question is, to what end? I mean, just look at yesterday. The president has been saying, wear a mask. He's been saying the right thing when he needs to, but he doesn't do it. He was in Texas. He was around people in very close proximity. There were people in the room where he was, very close to one another, not wearing masks. Looked a lot like that photo with Herman Cain, who is now gone from coronavirus. As you mentioned, it's important to say, we don't know exactly where he contracted it, but we do know that Cain just was like the president in saying masks are unnecessary and we shouldn't wear them, and he kind of was very open about not wanting to wear one. And the one thing I want to connect here, and Aaron, this better than the other two of us, is it's the health of people medically, but it's also the health of the economy. And the numbers that we saw today are so incredibly bad from the president's own Commerce Department. 32.9% annual rate of decline. That is the equivalent of what we saw today. They are so connected. And that is what the president has said privately and even publicly, what he has cared the most about, because he knows that sort of dictates his reelection. They're completely intertwined. And if that number isn't a wake-up call, in addition to the 150,000 Americans, including his friend Herman Cain, I'm not sure what is.
Dr. Reiner, Herman Cain is...
What he's going to say, he can't handle situations that he feels he's being upstaged. But if you look at his tweet about the housing situation, it is consistent, because in the 70s, his father and he were sued by the federal government for housing discrimination. They had to settle a discrimination lawsuit. He's played that race card of housing all of his career. And he's only going back to what he's always done. What he doesn't realize is that America no longer exists. Are there people in the suburbs that may have racist tendencies? Sure, but they are everywhere. But, Joy, we're in the era of gentrification. People from the suburbs are moving into the city. who is he talking to? The problem that we have in National Action Network, we get people saying we're being pushed out to the suburbs from the inner city.
That's right.
So he's talking to people that doesn't exist. He's still watching 1950s TV. He probably has a black and white television in his office.
Yeah, he's not up to date. Neil Katyal, I want to go to you on this because
this coronavirus and now the huge drop in the economy and the unemployment and everything else came during an election year. Because truthfully, this is a really serious matter, and it's very hard to look aside when the tone in this country is as bad as it is. There are a lot of people hurting out there, and I would just say on the point about getting to know Democrats or Republicans, frankly, it's so much more interesting to engage people with different views. I mean, it's kind of boring to hang out with the same people all the time. So I think there's really a challenge that we can make. I'm up here at the moment in Maine, and I can tell you these communities up here have been out supporting their neighbors and talking about all the things we're just talking about here. It's a great state, but they're encouraged to do so. So again, this has to come from the top, and it isn't just image, it's substance too.
Well, Juan, you hang out with people who think differently from you every day. We all watch it.
Yeah, I do. I even get hair cutting tips from Trey Gowdy. You know, the hair stuff. I pay attention to Trey's haircuts.
So Trey,
Can I say something nice about Juan?
Yes, please.
And there's no reason any of your viewers would know this, but Juan Williams sent a book to a young lawyer in South Carolina. He wouldn't let her pay for it. He wrote the nicest note to her. He didn't ask whether she was a Republican. He didn't ask anything. She happens to be a conservative woman of color, but he has a friend for life. And I do think most people are willing to engage in those acts of kindness. Most of us are like that. Yeah. It's just what we see is not that.
Yeah. You know, and I think, you know, it does go back to, I think people, you know, love to think that there isn't a very strong core in this country that agrees on a lot of things, because it benefits politicians and it benefits the media to keep telling everybody that we all hate each other and that we're all so divided. And I think that, you know, there are lessons in some of these numbers and in all that we agree on that that may be sort of informative as we go forward. I don't know what's going to happen as we head into this election season, or even if it's going to happen on November 3rd at this point. But I thank all of you for being here tonight. Juan Williams, Susan Eisenhower, Trey Gowdy, great group. Thanks for talking with us.
Yes, ma'am.
Great.
Thank you.
My pleasure.
So coming up, a bombshell.